Hi there, and welcome to our next episode of the weekly SDSU Center for Autism Research Spotlight. We're highlighting all the research that's being conducted by our San Diego State Autism Center members. We're here to take advantage of these stay-at-home orders that we're under during this COVID-19 pandemic in order to showcase the work that our center is doing for the San Diego autism community. My name is Janice Chan, the Administrative Coordinator at the Center.
And my name is Vinton Omaleki. I'm the Community Engagement Director here at the Center. Today we are speaking with Dr. Bonnie Kraemer, Professor in the Department of Special Education at SDSU. Thank you so much, Dr. Kraemer, for speaking with us. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me.
So could you just begin by sharing generally about the area of autism research that you do?
Okay, well, the work that I do is primarily in the area of secondary transition. And secondary transition is the period of sort of high school and young adulthood when individuals with disabilities transition out of the school system. And my area of research is in the area of autism. So looking at the period of transition for high school and young adults with autism and other developmental disabilities as they move from sort of the world of school to that of the world of adulthood.
And why is this research important? So, and then kind of following on that, what about this research really excites you, this topic?
Well, the area of research is important because for many years, the area of research for individuals with autism was really focused in the area of early childhood and really school age. Mm-hmm. But more recently, research has started to focus on adolescents and young adults and even older adults with autism, as there's recognition that as these individuals move through their life and through the lifespan, that we need to be really focusing on the practices and supports and services that they need, not just when they're in school, but as they enter the adult world and begin to live life a bit more independently.
I remember, gosh, it was like 10 years ago now that I was one of your students in the credential program at San Diego State. And I remember you, I believe it was in your class, your transition class, where you talked to us about, like, it was then called the tsunami of adults that, or like teenagers that were coming through the pipeline. And so it's kind of interesting to see 10 years later now, like, where we've come from, you know, really just focusing on early intervention and realizing, oh my gosh, all these kids are growing up and they need services and they need supports and they need jobs. And so, yeah, it's really cool to see how, you know, even in just 10 years, things have changed so much and increased in, you know, obviously the research has been a big piece of people learning more and realizing what people need.
Right. As we see the increase in the numbers of individuals with autism and more exiting the school system, I think, you know, parents are one of the loudest voices in saying, you know, okay, so we had these like services and supports when they were in school, but now what? You know, we need supports now, we need quality programming now, we need evidence-based practices in adult programs, and, you know, all of the things that, you know, parents were sort of asking for and that we're getting, you know, pretty good at delivering in school, they're now wanting in adulthood. And so I think somewhat recently within the last few years, you know, we're starting to see movement in that area, but it's still an under-researched area of study for sure in the area of autism.
Yeah. How did you even start getting into like looking into transition and adult aged? What's specific to autism?
Yeah, well, so I've always been interested in working in the area of adulthood and sort of secondary transition. Many years ago when I was getting my teaching credential, I worked at what was then a state developmental center or state institution. And I was a teacher of adults with very severe disabilities. So I was in my early 20s and my students were older than I was. And one of the things that I always thought about was, you know, what could have been done differently when they were potentially in school to help prepare them to be more independent in adulthood and to sort of keep them from living in this really most restrictive environment that you can have. And I think at that point, I was pursuing a master's degree. And then when I decided to get my PhD, I just knew that I wanted to do research in the area of transition. And I think a big part of it was the impressions that I got and teaching those adults at the State Developmental Center.
That's neat.
Yeah.
So you've been very influential in CSESA. So would you mind just kind of going into like what is CSESA and kind of just broadly what you've done within that and stuff like that?
Sure. So CSESA stands for the Center on Secondary Education for Students with Autism. CSESA is the acronym. And CSESA is a federally funded development grant, research and development grant from the Institute of Education Sciences. And this was a $10 million grant that was awarded to doctors Kara Hume and Sam Odom at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And it was awarded to them probably 7 years ago now. And the initial project was to look at the effectiveness of a comprehensive treatment program for high school and transition age students with autism. And basically this was a randomized controlled trial, and the work was done in 3 states. So we worked in North Carolina, Wisconsin, and California. Specifically, San Diego State was the California site. And we worked in 60 high schools with almost 600 youth with autism and their families and teachers. And so it's the largest evidence intervention study that has been conducted with high school and transition age students in the US.
Fantastic.
For those of our listeners who don't know, could you explain randomized control trial?
Sure. So randomized controlled trial is when some of the participants get sort of randomized to the treatment group or the experimental group. That means they get the intervention. And the other half of the sample gets randomized to either a control group, but more often it's kind of a services as usual, business as usual kind of control group. And that's how it was in the CSESA study. So in each of the states, we worked in 20 schools, and 10 of those schools were randomly assigned to the CSESA intervention. So the participants at those schools received the comprehensive intervention, and it was an intervention that they received for 2 years. It was a 2-year intervention. And then the schools that were randomly assigned to the services as usual condition, the students that were at those schools, they just got regular services. So if they were in special ed, they continued to receive those services, or speech and language, or whatever services they were already just receiving, just going to the school, they continued to receive those services. But they did not receive the comprehensive CSESA intervention.
And what was included within the comprehensive CSESA intervention?
So there's, for the CSESA intervention, there's 4 domains. So one domain focused on literacy, specifically was reading comprehension. So we had an intervention that we implemented with the students focused in the area of reading comprehension. We also had an intervention that focused on like self-regulation and sort of evidence-based practices. It was called PRISM. And a lot of the PRISM intervention was specific to the needs of the student. So if they had a behavior problem, it might be focused in the area of behavior management or behavior supports. If they needed help following a schedule, then we would utilize practices to support the student in that way. So that was kind of a flexible intervention called PRISM. We also had a transition and families intervention. Well, we helped school teams write quality transition plans that are aligned with indicator 13. We also had a parent group where parents came and for 9 weeks, for 90 minutes a week, and they learned about different aspects of transition. They learned about How do you transition your son or daughter to the Department of Voc Rehab? How do you get services with Voc Rehab? How do you, what do you do about conservatorship and rights for your son or daughter in adulthood? So they learned about these different kind of aspects of adulthood as part of the parent group. And then we also had the last domain that we focused on was social and communication. So we had a social skills intervention that we implemented that was a group intervention. We also utilized peer networks and peer supports, where we pair a typical student that doesn't have a disability with one of our CSESA participants with autism, and they helped to support them in the general ed classroom. They helped to support them in integrated like extracurricular activities and things like that. So it was kind of four-pronged, focusing on transition and families, literacy, and social communication, and then kind of behavior self-management with the PRISM.
Comprehensive is a great word to describe it.
Yes, yes, it was very comprehensive. And when you think that we had over 300 youth with autism involved in this 2-year intervention across the country, there was a lot of moving parts.
Mm-hmm.
So what were some of the findings from this intervention? I know you're still collecting data, but
yeah, so we finished the RCT, so the intervention part, we finished a couple years ago, and right now what we're doing is we're in the 2nd year of a 2-year follow-up, which was also funded by IES, the Institute of Education Sciences. And it's basically, the questions in the follow-up are, what are these young adults doing once they exit the school system? So we're, in a sense, what we are doing is we're talking with the young adults themselves, we're interviewing them. We also are talking with their families about, what is life like after high school? What is your son or daughter doing now? And then we also have some of the questionnaires that we utilized during the main CSESA study that we're also having the families and young adults complete follow-up. So we have an extra kind of data point to really answer the question, what is life like now? And does life look different for those that received the intervention, the CSESA intervention, versus those that did not? And yeah, we don't have answers to those questions right now because we're still in the follow-up, but those are the kinds of questions that we hope to answer from the follow-up.
That's great. I know a big part of CSESA was like creating resources for families, and I know on the website there's a lot of different resources. Besides looking on that website, are there any other resources you'd recommend for people that are interested in learning more about this topic?
Well, so for the CSESA project, we dissemination was a major piece of the grant, and there are so many different resources for families, and the website is designed with tabs specific to families, professionals, researchers, and we have a lot of very usable hands-on materials that families can use as well as educators. We have our Autism at a Glance series, which breaks down very simple but timely topics around maybe driving or making purchases in the community or dealing with intimate relationships. So these really sort of very sensitive and timely topics, we break down into some sort of simple, user-friendly materials that really are geared for families as well as educators. So the website is incredible in terms of the resources. Other resources for families in the area of transition that I think of, Autism Speaks, they really have started to come out with a lot of resources and services for this population, and they have toolkits and manuals around transition and employment and transitioning to post-secondary education. So I would recommend their website. The University of Kansas has the Transition Coalition, which is a website, and it's run through the University of Kansas. And there's a lot of nice resources on that website that families and teachers can utilize as well.
Great. Yeah, so we'll get those links and we'll post them underneath this video. So if anybody is interested to get those resources, they can click on those links.
Yeah,
So,
one more that I'm just thinking while you're talking is the National the Technical Assistance Center on Transition, NTACT. That would be another terrific resource for teachers in particular. It has lesson plans, it has all kinds of materials, curricula that teachers can use for transition age and high school students with autism.
fantastic. So thank you so much, Dr. Kraemer, for sharing your expertise and with our community. We really appreciate your time and the impact you're making in autism research.
Of course, I'm happy to share, and it's exciting to be able to, talk about what I love to do and to share it with the community. And I just really appreciate that you guys are doing this and highlighting the work of the researchers that are part of the center, and hopefully kind of get the word out so people know what we're doing at SDSU.
Yeah, absolutely. So for you folks who are watching, if you want to learn more about our center and our center members, you can find more at autism.sdsu.edu.
Or we're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Our handle is at SDSU Autism. And we'll see you next time for our next Research Spotlight. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected.